The first shot ripped through the quiet evening air, shattering the composure of a typical Tuesday night in Canley Heights. It was just after 8:30 p.m., a time when most families in Sydney's southwest were settling in, perhaps watching a bit of telly, kids getting ready for bed. But for those inside the unassuming brick veneer home on Prospect Road, their world was about to be torn apart irrevocably. A frantic call to 000, the sound of screams, the desperate scramble for safety. And then the sickening realization: one man lay dead, 4 others wounded. Their lives forever altered by a brazen act of violence that would send shockwaves through their community and across the state. This wasn't just a random act. Police would quickly realize this was a calculated, targeted strike, steeped in the murky, dangerous world of organized crime. Before the chaos, before the flashing lights and the wailing sirens, life in Canley Heights for many was about family, hard work, and the slow, steady build of a good life. It's a suburb that embodies the vibrant multicultural fabric of Sydney's West, a place where different generations of migrant families have put down roots, opened businesses, and built communities. Take for instance the family at the center of this tragedy. We won't name them for their privacy, but let's call them the Chengs. They were an extended family living across a couple of houses on the same street, a common arrangement in areas where family ties run deep. The patriarch, Mr. Cheng, had arrived in Australia decades ago, working tirelessly building a small but successful import-export business that allowed him to put his kids through school, buy a home, and enjoy the fruits of his labor. His children, now adults, were pursuing their own careers, raising their own families, often gathering for large, boisterous Sunday lunches. They were by all accounts pillars of their local community, known for their generosity, their quiet dignity. Like many Australians, they believed in a fair go, in the idea that hard work would lead to security. Their neighbours were a mix of long-term residents and newer families, all navigating the cost of living pressures, the rising house prices that characterise the Sydney property market, and the daily grind of life in a bustling city. The Canley Heights incident would rip through this quiet existence, exposing the vulnerability that can lurk beneath the surface, even in seemingly ordinary lives. It was a stark reminder that some battles aren't fought in tribunals over unfair dismissal or consumer rights, but in the brutal, unforgiving theatre of the streets. On that Tuesday evening, the 19th of May, the Chengs were gathered at the Prospect Road address, a routine family dinner. The aroma of a home-cooked meal likely filled the air, the gentle hum of conversation, perhaps a television flickering in the background. Then, without warning, the front door, or perhaps a window, was breached. Multiple assailants, their faces obscured, their intentions clear, stormed into the residence. The first shots were fired almost immediately. It wasn't a warning, it was an execution. Panic erupted. People scattered, desperate for cover, for an escape. The specific details of what transpired inside that house are still under intense police investigation, but what is known is that one man, a cousin visiting from interstate, suffered a fatal gunshot wound. His life was extinguished in moments, a senseless tragedy. 4 others, including Mr. Cheng's eldest son and a young relative, were also hit, their injuries ranging from serious to critical. The assailants, their mission accomplished, vanished into the night as swiftly as they arrived, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror and grief. Neighbors hearing the gunshots, the screams, were quick to call emergency services. Paramedics and police descended on Prospect Road within minutes, transforming the quiet residential street into a chaotic crime scene. Forensics teams would spend days meticulously combing through every inch of the property, searching for clues, for any scrap of evidence that could lead them to the perpetrators. Police Det Supt Craig Middleton would later address the media confirming their belief that this was a targeted attack, not a random home invasion. The focus immediately turned to the shadowy connections that could explain such a brazen act of violence in a suburban street. Was it a dispute over money, a rivalry? A message being sent? The answers remained elusive in the immediate aftermath, leaving the community reeling and gripped by fear. This wasn't a case destined for the Fair Work Commission dealing with unfair dismissal under the Fair Work Act 2009. Nor was it a dispute over a dodgy renovation that would end up in NCAT. This was a criminal matter of the highest order, one that would be dealt with by the full force of the New South Wales Police Force and eventually the criminal courts. The investigation immediately became a homicide squad operation with detectives working around the clock. Their primary objective: identify and apprehend those responsible. The evidence presented in such a case isn't about contracts or consumer guarantees under the Australian consumer law. It's about ballistics, DNA, CCTV footage, witness statements and the intricate web of intelligence gathering that police rely on when dealing with organized crime. What was at stake was not a financial settlement or an order for specific performance, but justice for a murdered man and his terrorized family. The police would be building a case that, if successful, would lead to charges of murder and grievous bodily harm with potential penalties of life imprisonment. The legal battles ahead, if and when arrests are made, would unfold in the Supreme Court of New South Wales, with prosecutors needing to prove beyond reasonable doubt the guilt of the accused. The standard of proof is incredibly high in criminal cases, particularly murder, and the defense would scrutinize every piece of evidence, every procedural step taken by the police. The family, meanwhile, would be navigating a different kind of battle: the profound grief of losing a loved one, the trauma of surviving a violent attack, and the long, arduous road to physical and psychological recovery supported by Medicare for medical costs and potentially victims' compensation. As of the time of this recording, the full resolution of the Canley Heights shooting remains an ongoing police investigation. Arrests have been made, but the process of justice is slow, deliberate, and often fraught with complexity. The alleged perpetrators, once apprehended, will face the full weight of the New South Wales justice system. This will involve committal hearings to determine if there's sufficient evidence for a trial, followed by potentially lengthy Supreme Court proceedings. The outcome for the accused could range from convictions for murder and severe sentences to lesser charges or even acquittals, depending on the strength of the evidence presented and the arguments made by both prosecution and defense. For the Cheng family, the legal process will be long, arduous, and emotionally draining. While a conviction might bring a sense of closure, it can never truly bring back what was lost. The economic impact on their small business, the medical and psychological support required for the survivors, the profound sense of insecurity that now shadows their lives, these are the human costs that go beyond any court ruling. Justice in this context is not a neat, tidy package, it's a relentless pursuit, an imperfect outcome, and a journey measured in years, not months. The community of Canley Heights, and indeed wider Sydney, grapples with the lingering fear, the breach of their sense of safety. This tragedy in Canley Heights serves as a grim reminder that while many of us navigate the everyday challenges of the Australian legal system, disputes with landlords under the Residential Tenancies Act, issues with superannuation, or consumer complaints to the ACCC, there's a darker undercurrent of crime that profoundly impacts lives. What this means for Australians, particularly those in communities vulnerable to